Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another Sunday night story time with Skaaro the Red. Previously, in the captain of the Golden Falcon, Captain Windblade, and her partner Huijin escaped when the Golden Falcon, of course, blew up and sunk, and they made their way to Valen City, the fabled city of ghosts. And while in Valen, because they were wanted by the authorities for piracy, of course, they went under the assumed names of Bonnie and Thurnan. And so we pick up right where we left off, as Bonnie and Thurnan were hiding out at Morgan's Inn in Valen City after a failed assassination attempt.
Neither Bonnie nor Thurnan were able to get much rest after the attempted assassination, so they decided to leave before daybreak. They quickly gathered their gear, left the room key on the table, and quietly slipped out of Morgan's Inn. The sun had barely begun to rise over Valen City, and it was still somewhat dark outside. The streets of Valen City were mostly vacant, with the exception of a few ghosts still drifting about aimlessly. "We should head towards Valen's southern gates and see if there's some way we can slip out of the city," Thurnan suggested. "Once we are out of the city, Old Velmean Road will take us deep into the forests and east towards Greenshores, where we can lay low for a while." "You elves and your forests," replied Bonnie. "Those forests are full of orcish slavers from Moran, just waiting to capture us and sell us into slavery. We should head west towards Firedrake County. There may be a few old pirates' havens in that region." "Fine by me," Thurnan conceded, "but first things first. It will be daylight soon, and we—" "Shh, wait," Bonnie said, nudging Thurnan. Just then, he noticed the murmurs of distant speech and clanking of armor. Bonnie pointed towards the intersection ahead where a group of city guards were approaching. Quickly, they darted back into the shadows of a nearby laneway and ducked around a corner just as the group of guards passed by. "Let's go," Bonnie whispered. Then, just as they turned to continue, that very same ghost they encountered the night before appeared before them again. Still grinning, with a mouthful of sharp, jagged teeth, the ghost waved at them and pointed them further down a narrow laneway. Bonnie and Thurnan looked at each other a moment. Then, with a shrug, they nodded and followed the ghost deeper into Valen's labyrinth of streets and laneways. After traveling several blocks, with the strange grinning ghost vanishing then reappearing, all the while beckoning them onward, they eventually came to a gated stone tunnel entrance. With a strange, spooky giggle, the ghost passed through the gate's bars and then faded away into the darkness below. The gate was old and rusted, but still sturdy and locked with a large clasp. Beside the gate was an unlit torch mounted in a sconce on the stone. Thurnan tried to pull the gate open, but it wouldn't budge. "Sometimes these things take a more delicate touch," Bonnie stated, as she pulled several thin strips of metal from a pouch on her belt. Inserting the little metal picks into the locking mechanisms, she twisted and turned for a moment, then, with a few small clicks, the lock popped open. With a loud creak, the rusty old gate swung open. Thurnan took the torch from the sconce and lit it, then they descended into the dark tunnel. Hearing the sound of flowing water in the distance, Thurnan surmised, "I think this is a maintenance tunnel for Valen City's drainage systems." As they continued down the stairs, "If that's the case, we may have found our escape route," Bonnie said. At the bottom of the staircase was a long dark canal with a narrow walkway along the side. Because Valen was situated in a valley, there was considerable amount of water runoff, as well as the city's sewage, which needed to be drained off into the sea. To deal with this, the engineers who built Valen constructed a maze of underground canals, which ultimately drained the city's excess water into the sea. "Ugh, it smells terrible down here," Bonnie stated. "We should follow the flow of water," Thurnan suggested. "That should lead us to the coast." "Fine," Bonnie replied. "The sooner we can get out of this stink, the better." They continued down the narrow walkway along the canal, and after passing over several junctures, Thurnan and Bonnie soon reached a split in the canal. The water seemed to flow downwards in both directions, and both canals looked identical. "Which way now?" Bonnie asked. I've no idea, Thurnan responded. Both tunnels look identical, and it's impossible to know which direction is which down here. Just then, they heard a terrible shrieking noise in the distance. Looking back the way they came, Bonnie asked, "What was that?" in a hushed tone. "I don't even want to stick around and find out," Thurnan responded. Then, as they turned back around, that strange grinning ghost again appeared in the distance, beckoning them down the left canal. "That's good enough for me," Bonnie replied. Nodding in agreement, Thurnan and Bonnie quickly followed their ghastly guide down the left canal. After a short distance, they noticed a light further down the canal. As they approached, they found a small metal doorway set into a stone wall along the walkway, with a torch in a mounted sconce beside it. Through a window in the door, Bonnie and Thurnan peeked into what appeared to be a workshop. Inside, a lone dwarf busily worked on something at the bench. He was scruffy and unkempt, with ragged clothing and long tangled hair. He grumbled and cursed as he toiled away in his little workshop, oblivious to Bonnie and Thurnan. "I bet he knows how to get out of here," Bonnie stated. "Aye," Thurnan agreed. "Let's hope he doesn't put up too much of a fuss." The door wasn't locked, so Bonnie pulled it open while Thurnan charged into the room wielding the daggers he took from their would-be assassin Yarville at Morgan's Inn. Before the little dwarf could even turn around, Thurnan had already set the point of his dagger to the back of the dwarf's neck. "Hands where we can see 'em," Bonnie ordered, "else we'll open your neck right where you stand." The dwarf dropped his tools and slowly raised his hands. "Please," he said, I don't have nothing of value, but take whatever you want." "Actually," Bonnie replied, "we were just a little lost, and we were hoping you could show us the way out." "Oh yes, of course," the dwarf replied. "No need for the blade. My name's Dumar, and I'll be happy to show you the way." Dumar headed out of his workshop out to the walkway and grabbed his torch from the sconce. "Right this way," he said, gesturing back the way they came. "We need to be leaving the city, not heading back into it," Bonnie stated. Dumar looked back at her, and then at Thurnan, with his twin daggers. Just then, they heard the terrible shrieking noise again, but it was considerably closer this time. "Any idea what that may be?" Thurnan asked him. "In all my years working down here, I've never heard such a thing," Dumar replied. "Then best we get moving, eh?" Bonnie stated. Dumar led them further down the canal and through several junctures. "I know this place like the back of me own hand," Dumar boasted. "I've been working maintenance down here for nearly 100 years now." Although they moved through the tunnels as quickly as they could, the shrieking noise continued to grow closer and closer. "Dumar, how much further?" Bonnie demanded, growing impatient. "We're almost there," Dumar said. A few minutes later, Dumar led them into a large chamber, where 6 canals converged into a single deep circular pool. On the far side was a single metal door. "I need to close all the gates to release the safety mechanism for the door," Dumar said, as he headed over to a series of large valves, gauges, and switches. Dumar turned several of the valves shut, and a few seconds later, numerous large metal grates began rolling down shut over each of the incoming canals. As the gates rolled shut, Dumar ran around the edge to the metal door at the far side. Bonnie and Thurnan followed behind, but before they could reach the door, Dumar quickly ducked through and slammed it shut. With a loud clang, Dumar locked the door as Bonnie stood banging on it. "You'll pay for this, you little rodent! I'll flay you alive and feed you to the fishes!" she screamed. Then, out of the convergence pool, a terrifying creature slowly rose from the churning water. The murky brown beast climbed out of the pool and stood on 4 legs. It had a lobster-like carapace and 2 massive pincers. Its mouth was a horrific array of sharp teeth and dozens of long, wriggling tentacles. Standing over Bonnie and Thurnan, the creature screamed its high-pitched shriek, then attacked with its huge pincers. Bonnie and Thurnan dove in opposite directions, avoiding the creature's attack. "It's a chull!" Thurnan shouted, while dodging another pincer attack from the giant aberration. "You distract it while I attack, and watch out for those tentacles!" Bonnie nodded from the opposite side of the pool, then shouted at the chull. "Hey, get over here, you giant lobster! Come and get me!" The chull turned its head towards Bonnie with a jerk, then shrieked again loudly. Thurnan took his chance and leapt onto the chull's back, then drove his daggers deep in between the sections of its shell between its head and neck. The creature screamed and grabbed Thurnan with one of its massive pincers, then flung him across the pool, slamming him into a stone wall. The Chul flailed around, trying to reach the daggers Thurnin left stuck deep into the back of its neck. Then, after a moment, it dove back into the pool and disappeared into the dark water. Still somewhat dazed, Thurnin slowly climbed back to his feet and began heading back around the pool towards Bonnie. But before he could reach her, the Chul splashed up out of the pool, grabbed hold of Thurnin with both pincers. Lifting him closely to his mouth, the Chul lashed out at him with its tentacles, and Thurnin was immediately paralyzed by the Chul's toxins. Once Thurnin was incapacitated, the Chul dropped his limp body and turned its attention towards Bonnie, who was already around the other side of the pool and was busy randomly turning the valves Dumar had operated earlier. As the Chul began approaching Bonnie, several of the canal gates around the pool began to open, releasing the water into the pool. Rushing waves of water crashed into the Chul, and it lost its balance and stumbled over. Bonnie then leapt atop the stumbling creature. Then, grabbing hold of Thurnin's daggers, Bonnie pried upwards against the Chul's carapace. With a loud crunching sound, the shell broke loose and the Chul screamed in agony. Holding tight as the creature thrashed around, Bonnie then began stabbing relentlessly into the exposed viscera. After a few moments of Bonnie's relentless hacking into its head and spine, the Chul shrieked one last time and then collapsed. Bonnie climbed off the Chul's still twitching corpse and rushed over to Thurnin, who laid paralyzed on the walkway. He was still alive, and Bonnie said, "Don't try to talk. You're just paralyzed. The Chul's toxin will wear off in a few minutes." As Bonnie waited for the paralysis to wear off, she described all the creative ways she would make Dumar suffer a slow and painful death, while she fiddled with the lock on the big metal door. After a short wait, Thurnin began slowly regaining his movement. At first, just his fingers, then hands, arms, and legs, and soon Thurnin was able to stand and walk again. "Are you okay now?" Bonnie asked. "Yes, thank you," Thurnin replied. "Aside from this headache, I'm ready to get moving." "Good," said Bonnie. "I've almost got this locked." Then, with a loud click, the large metal door swung open. Thurnin retrieved his daggers and gave the dead Chul a swift kick, then followed Bonnie through the doors and into a long, dark stone corridor. Eventually, after walking for quite some time, the corridor ended at a stone staircase leading upwards. "Finally," Bonnie said excitedly. "I have had enough of this stinking cesspit." "Wait," Thurnin said, drawing his daggers. "We don't know what might be waiting for us up there." "I hope it's that nasty little cur Dumar," said Bonnie. Slowly, they ascended the stairs until they reached the surface. The staircase gave way to a short stone-hewn tunnel, which exited from a cliff face along the coast, only a short distance from the city. It was still daylight, but the sun was on its descent and evening was fast approaching. Looking down the coast to the east, they could see the massive copper-colored walls shielding Valen. "Seems westward to Fire Drake it is," Bonnie said with a smile. "We'll need to find somewhere to camp soon. Nightfall is quickly approaching," Thurnin stated, as they trekked down the beach towards the setting sun.
And that's all for Chapter 12 of the ridiculous Ballad of Skaaro the Red. If you're enjoying our stories, please like, thumbs up, subscribe, upvote, retweet, share with all your friends anyone you might know might enjoy this kind of material. And I'd like to thank everyone for watching, and tune in again next week as we continue the ridiculous Ballad of Skaaro the Red every Sunday night at 9 p.m. on my Twitch channel. That's twitch.tv/Skaaro the Red. Thanks for watching and have a good evening.